The rain had just started when Private First Class Emma Hayes stepped off the transport bus at Camp Lejeune. Her boots sank into the muddy gravel, and the air carried that heavy mix of diesel, wet earth, and salt from the nearby Carolina coast. She paused for a second, tightening her pack straps. This was it, the base where she'd spend the next stretch of her life. She wasn't nervous. Not exactly, but she knew what people would see when they looked at her. Small frame, quiet face, a medic patch on her uniform. To them, she wasn't a warrior. She wasn't the kind that stories were told about. And she already knew what they'd say. By the time she'd dropped her duffel in the barracks, the whispers had started. Another medic. One Marine muttered under his breath, loud enough for her to hear. Good for Band-Aids and Tylenol. That's it, another chuckled. Yeah, just patch us up after the real fight. Emma ignored it. She'd heard worse in basic. She'd heard it from instructors, from other recruits, even from a sergeant who told her point blank, "You'll never be more than a helper, Hayes. And that's fine. Just stay out of the way when the bullets fly." But what they didn't know, what none of them cared to ask, was that Emma's father had been a firefighter back in Virginia. She'd grown up watching him run into burning houses when everyone else was running out. She'd seen what courage looked like, smelled it in the smoke when he came home with his gear. And when he died in a warehouse collapse, she swore she'd live her life with that same grit. Now, standing in a base full of hardened Marines, she felt that promise burning inside her. The first week was a test of patience. Emma treated blisters, sprained ankles, dehydration cases. The work was steady, important, but invisible. No one thanked her. No one respected it. The squad she'd been assigned to trained every morning on the range while she carried a heavy medical pack that weighed almost as much as her rifle. It was awkward, bulky, and sometimes the straps cut so deep into her shoulders they left bruises. Still, she carried it without complaint, but that didn't stop the remarks. "You'll slow us down, Hayes. Better hope you can run with all that junk. You're not combat, don't pretend." One night in the mess hall, Corporal Blake, broad-shouldered with the kind of swagger that filled a room, sat down across from her with his buddies. He smirked over his tray of mashed potatoes. "You know what my old man used to say? Medics are like spare tires. You don't think about them until you're in trouble. But otherwise, dead weight." The table roared with laughter. Emma didn't answer. She kept eating, eyes fixed on her food. Inside, her stomach turned, but not from shame. From fire, because she knew one day there'd be a moment. And when it came, she'd prove them all wrong. That moment came sooner than anyone expected. It was supposed to be a routine patrol exercise just outside the wire. A training run, nothing serious. The kind of day where Marines complained more about the heat than about threats. Emma walked in the middle of the squad, gear pressing heavy on her shoulders, sweat dripping down her back. The woods around them were dense, cicadas screaming overhead. Then, without warning, the first shot cracked. It wasn't a blank. It wasn't a drill. The squad dove for cover as bullets ripped through the trees. Bark splintered. Leaves exploded. Somewhere ahead, hidden in the shadows, an enemy force had opened fire. Emma's heart pounded as she hit the dirt, clutching her pack. The radio sparked with frantic calls. The Marines returned fire, rifles snapping, the air thick with smoke and noise. And then she heard it. Someone screaming. She crawled through the brush, ignoring the shouts to stay down. 30 feet ahead, 2 Marines lay sprawled near a ditch. One clutched his leg, blood pouring out between his fingers. The other wasn't moving at all. Emma's pulse hammered in her ears. Bullets hissed overhead. Every instinct screamed to stay put. But something stronger pushed her forward. Her father's voice. Her promise. She grabbed her pack and ran. "Hayes, stay down," Blake shouted, his face pale as he fired from behind a log. But Emma didn't listen. She reached the wounded Marines, dragging one by the straps of his vest into the shallow ditch. Bullets snapped against the dirt around her, close enough to spray grit across her cheeks. The Marine with the leg wound was losing blood fast. She ripped open her pack, hands moving without hesitation. Tourniquet, pressure bandage, morphine. She worked fast, faster than she thought she could, her training turning into instinct. "Stay with me," she whispered, voice steady even as her body trembled. "You're not going anywhere today. Not on my watch." Then she turned to the other Marine. His chest wasn't moving, no breath, no pulse. She didn't think. She just acted. Ripped open his vest, started compressions right there in the mud while the firefight roared around them. 30 pushes, 2 breaths, 30 pushes, 2 breaths. Come on, she growled, sweat stinging her eyes. Come on, Marine. You don't quit on me now. It felt like hours, though it was only minutes. Then suddenly the Marine coughed. A ragged, broken cough, but alive. Emma almost cried with relief, but there was no time. The gunfire hadn't stopped, and the squad was calling for backup. She had 2 Marines down and no way to move them both at once. So she made a choice. She grabbed the larger Marine, the one she'd brought back from the edge, and slung his arm over her shoulders. Her knees buckled, but she forced herself up, dragging him inch by inch toward cover. The other Marine, the one with the leg wound, looked up at her, eyes wide with fear. Don't leave me!" Emma looked back, and in that instant she knew she couldn't. She dropped to the ground, crawling back under fire, dragging the second Marine with her free arm. Her body screamed with exhaustion. Her shoulders burned. Her ears rang with every gunshot. But she kept moving, one foot then another, one pull then another, until, finally, she collapsed behind a barricade with both Marines beside her. Safe. Alive. When the firefight ended, and reinforcements pushed the enemy back, the squad gathered in stunned silence around Emma. Her hands were red with blood, her face streaked with mud, her uniform torn. But both Marines were alive because of her. Corporal Blake stared at her like he'd never seen her before. The same man who'd mocked her as a spare tire now looked speechless. Emma sat back against the dirt, chest heaving. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just looked at the men she'd saved, then at the others around her. And in her eyes, there was a fire none of them could deny. She wasn't just a medic. She was a soldier, and from that day on, no one would forget it. The barracks were quiet that night, but Emma Hayes couldn't sleep. Her muscles still ached from carrying 2 full-grown Marines across that muddy field. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the gunfire, saw the blood on her hands. She wasn't haunted by it, she was used to blood, but she couldn't shake the weight of what had just happened. She had done her job. More than her job. She had dragged 2 men out under fire when everyone else froze. And yet, instead of pride, she felt a strange emptiness, because she knew tomorrow would come. And tomorrow people would start talking. The talking started early. In the mess hall the next morning, Emma walked in with her tray, keeping her head down. The clatter of dishes and the buzz of conversation filled the room. But then she felt it, eyes turning toward her. Some whispered. Others just stared. She slid into a seat at the end of a table, trying to eat quickly. But across the room, Corporal Blake pushed back his chair. The same man who'd mocked her just 2 nights earlier. He walked toward her, the room going quiet as he did. Emma braced herself. She was used to his sarcasm. She was used to being just a medic, but Blake didn't mock her this time. He stopped in front of her table, jaw tight, eyes unreadable. Then, in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, he said, "You saved 2 Marines yesterday. Nobody here can say otherwise." Emma looked up at him, unsure if it was a compliment or a challenge. But then Blake did something no one expected. He nodded, not a big gesture, just a small, firm nod, the kind men give when words aren't enough, and with that he turned and walked away. The room buzzed again, louder now, and Emma realized things had changed, but change didn't mean acceptance. Not yet. That afternoon, her squad was called into a debrief with their commanding officer, Captain Reynolds, a tall, sharp-eyed man with decades of service behind him. He stood at the front of the room, arms crossed, as the Marines filed in. "You all saw what happened yesterday," Reynolds said. His voice carried authority, the kind that silenced any side chatter. "Enemy fire, casualties prevented, lives saved, and one of you went above and beyond." Emma's heart skipped. "Private Hayes," Reynolds said, his gaze fixed on her. "You put yourself at risk to pull your men out. You kept your cool under fire. That's what this uniform stands for." The room was silent. For a moment, Emma felt the recognition she had waited for. But then Reynolds' tone shifted. "That said, Hayes, what you did was reckless. You broke formation. You exposed yourself. That could have gotten you killed. You're a medic, not an assault trooper. Next time, remember your role." The words cut deep. Emma sat still, face blank, but inside she burned. He had praised her and dismissed her in the same breath, as if her courage had been an accident. As if saving those lives wasn't part of what a medic should do. The days that followed were complicated. Some Marines treated her differently now. They gave her nods of respect in the hallways. They carried her gear when she wasn't looking. A few even sat with her at meals, offering small talk where there had once been silence. But others didn't change. She got lucky, one Marine muttered when he thought she couldn't hear. Hero complex, another said. Next time she'll get herself shot. Emma ignored it. She had always ignored it. But this time the words dug deeper because she had proven herself. She had done what they said she couldn't, and still, it wasn't enough. One evening she found herself sitting outside the barracks, the sun sinking low over the base. The air smelled of pine and sea salt, and for the first time in days things were quiet. She pulled a photo from her pocket. Her father in his firefighter uniform. Helmet tucked under one arm, a grin on his soot-streaked face. She stared at it for a long time. Was it reckless, Dad? She whispered. Or was it just what you taught me? She didn't have the answer. But she knew one thing. She couldn't go back to being invisible. Not anymore. The next test came a week later. Her squad was sent on another mission, this one deeper, more dangerous. Rumors swirled that insurgents were stockpiling weapons in an abandoned farmhouse near the tree line. Intelligence wasn't clear, but the squad was ordered to sweep the area. Emma packed her gear carefully. She checked her tourniquets, her bandages, her morphine. But she also checked her rifle twice. Something about the mission felt different. Heavier. As they moved out, the woods grew darker, the air thick with tension. Every branch crack sounded louder than usual. Every shadow looked like movement, and then, again, it happened. Gunfire. Sudden. Violent. Echoing through the trees. The squad hit the dirt, returning fire. But this time it wasn't a quick skirmish. It was an ambush. The farmhouse lit up with muzzle flashes. Enemy fire pinned them down. Emma's instincts kicked in. She scanned the line, looking for the wounded. She spotted Sergeant Miller slumped against a tree, blood staining his side. Another Marine was crawling toward him, hit in the arm. Medic, someone shouted. Emma didn't hesitate. She bolted forward, low to the ground, bullets snapping inches above her helmet. She slid beside Miller, her hands already pulling supplies from her pack. But this time, something was different. Because when she looked up, she saw not just wounded men, she saw Corporal Blake. He was out in the open, firing to cover her, exposed, risking himself to give her a chance. The same man who once called her dead weight. Their eyes met for a split second, and in that look, Emma saw something she had never seen before. Trust. She worked quickly, patching Miller's wound, injecting morphine, stabilizing him enough to move. Her hands were steady, her voice calm. But her heart raced with a fierce determination, because now it wasn't about proving herself. It wasn't about fighting for respect, it was about saving lives, period. And she realized, maybe that had always been enough. The squad pulled back under heavy fire, carrying their wounded. They didn't lose a single man that day, and Emma was a big reason why. When they finally made it back to base, exhausted and bruised, something remarkable happened. As she walked into the barracks, covered in dirt and sweat, the Marines stood. Not all of them, but enough. They stood and nodded. Some even clapped. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was respect, the kind that mattered. Emma felt her throat tighten. She didn't cry. She wouldn't give them that. But deep down she knew something had changed. She was no longer just a medic. And though she didn't know it yet, her greatest test was still to come. The North Carolina sun beat down on the tarmac as Emma Hayes adjusted the straps of her medical pack. A helicopter's rotors thundered overhead, kicking up dust and grit. She narrowed her eyes against the storm of sand, heart pounding as the squad prepared to load up. This wasn't training anymore. Word had come in that a supply convoy had been ambushed miles outside the wire. A mix of Marines and civilian contractors were pinned down in hostile territory. Casualties were reported, but nobody knew how many, or how long they could hold out. Emma stood at the edge of the group, double-checking her gear. Her hands moved steady, but inside she felt the weight of it. She had been in firefights before, but this was different. This was an active rescue, and this time, she wasn't sure everyone would make it back. As they lifted off, Emma sat wedged between Blake and another Marine, the noise of the chopper drowning out everything but her own thoughts. She remembered Captain Reynolds's words, reckless. She remembered the whispers, hero complex, and then she remembered the 2 Marines she had dragged out alive. She clenched her jaw. Reckless or not, she knew who she was. She wasn't just there to patch wounds. She was there to bring them home. The landing zone was chaos. Smoke rose from burning vehicles. Gunfire echoed through the valley. The convoy had been hit hard. Trucks riddled with holes, tires shredded, crates of supplies scattered across the dirt. The survivors were crouched behind what little cover remained, returning fire with everything they had left. As the Marines disembarked, Emma hit the ground running. Her eyes scanned the scene. Blood on the dirt, bodies down, screams cutting through the roar of gunfire. "Medic!" someone shouted. Emma sprinted toward the sound. A young contractor lay sprawled beside a flipped truck, shrapnel buried deep in his chest. His breathing was ragged, shallow. She dropped to her knees, sliding her pack open. Hands moving fast, pressure dressing, gauze, airway kit. Her fingers worked with precision, blocking out the chaos around her. She could hear bullets snapping, hear the shouts of Marines, but she stayed locked on the man before her. "You're not dying today," she whispered, forcing calm into her voice. "Stay with me." The man's eyes fluttered, pain etched across his face. But his breathing steadied. His chest rose. He was alive. Emma exhaled, relief rushing through her, until the ground shook with a sudden explosion. An RPG slammed into the wreck of a nearby truck, sending fire and debris into the air. Emma was thrown sideways, ears ringing. Through the smoke, she saw Blake. He was out in the open, returning fire, barking orders to keep the line together. He turned, spotted her, and shouted, "Hayes! We've got Marines trapped in the lead vehicle. Move!" Emma didn't hesitate. She grabbed her pack and sprinted forward. The lead vehicle was a mess. Engine block blown apart, cab crumpled like a soda can. Inside, she could see 2 Marines. One was slumped against the window, blood running down his forehead. The other was conscious but pinned, his leg trapped beneath twisted metal. Emma's stomach clenched. The smell of fuel and fire filled the air. If the flames spread, the vehicle would go up. She dropped her pack, clawing her way inside. The conscious Marine, eyes wide with panic, grabbed her sleeve. "Don't leave me. Please, don't leave me here." "You're not alone," Emma said firmly. "I'm getting you out." She braced herself against the wreckage, straining to free his leg. The metal cut into her gloves, tore at her uniform. Sweat stung her eyes, but she didn't stop. "Come on," she grunted. "Move with me." With one final heave, the Marine's leg came free. He cried out in pain, but Emma pulled him out of the wreck, dragging him clear of the flames. She shoved a tourniquet around his thigh, cinching it tight. But when she turned back for the second Marine, the unconscious one, her blood ran cold. The fire had spread. Flames licked across the cab. The heat was unbearable. She looked at him, at the smoke filling the cabin, at the growing fire. She didn't think. She just moved. Emma crawled back inside, the heat scorching her arms. She pulled at the Marine's vest, dragging him across broken glass and twisted steel. Every muscle in her body screamed. Every breath seared her lungs. But she didn't stop. She dragged him inch by inch until, finally, she stumbled free of the wreck, collapsing on the dirt with both Marines beside her. The truck exploded behind them, a deafening roar that sent shockwaves through the ground. Emma curled over the unconscious Marine, shielding him with her own body until the flames died down. When she looked up, Blake was standing there, staring at her like he couldn't believe what he'd just seen. And then, he smiled. Not mockery, not surprise, but respect, real respect. The firefight raged on, but something shifted. The squad, inspired, pushed harder. Marines who once doubted her now rallied around her. She wasn't in the background anymore. She was in the thick of it, side by side with them. Emma moved from one casualty to the next, patching wounds, dragging men to cover, never stopping, never slowing down. The medical pack grew lighter as supplies ran out, but her determination only grew heavier. Every man she touched lived. Every Marine she reached survived, and slowly the tide turned. Hours later, the battlefield was silent. Smoke rose in thin trails. The enemy had melted away into the hills, leaving the convoy battered but alive. Emma stood in the wreckage, her uniform stained with blood and ash. She was exhausted, every muscle trembling. But as she looked around at the faces of the men she had saved, she felt a surge of something she hadn't felt before. Not just pride, not just relief, belonging. For the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider. She felt like one of them. Back at base, the squad gathered in the barracks. The mood was heavy but alive. Marines joked quietly, checked their gear, shared tired smiles. And when Emma walked in, conversation stopped. Then Corporal Blake stood. He walked across the room, slow, deliberate. And in front of everyone, he raised his hand. Not in salute, not in command, but in gratitude. "Hayes," he said, his voice steady. "You didn't just save lives today. You carried us all. And for what it's worth, if I had to go back out there tomorrow, I'd trust you with my life." The room was silent. Then one by one the Marines nodded. A few clapped her on the shoulder. Others simply met her eyes with a respect that words couldn't match. Emma swallowed hard, her throat tight. She didn't speak. She didn't need to, because for the first time since she'd arrived, she knew she was no longer just a medic. She was a Marine. And though the night felt calm, deep down she knew her hardest trial was still ahead, the one that would define her forever. The night was heavy with rain, steady drops drumming against the tin roofs of Camp Lejeune. Emma Hayes sat on the edge of her bunk, staring at her boots. They were caked in dried mud and blood, scars of the last mission. She hadn't bothered to clean them. Her body was tired, bones aching, bruises dark across her arms. But her mind wouldn't rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw fire. She smelled smoke. She heard the voices of the men she had dragged from hell itself. She'd saved them. All of them, and yet the recognition she expected hadn't come. Captain Reynolds had congratulated the squad on a successful operation. He had noted medical efficiency under pressure. But his words were clinical, detached. He hadn't looked her in the eye. He hadn't said her name. That silence cut deeper than the bullets ever had. The following week, a ceremony was held on base. Commendations for bravery, medals for valor. Emma stood in formation, rain dripping off her helmet, her medical pack weighing heavy against her back. As names were called, Marines stepped forward. Corporal Blake received a medal for leadership under fire, Sergeant Miller for sustaining the line despite injury. Applause filled the air. Emma waited, heart pounding, but her name was never called. When the ceremony ended, the squad dispersed. Blake lingered, jaw tight, eyes troubled. He walked to her, lowering his voice. "You deserved more," he said simply. Emma forced a small smile. "It doesn't matter. They're alive. That's enough." But inside she felt the sting. She had risked her life more than once. She had carried them all. And still, to the higher ranks, she was invisible. Just a medic. That night, Emma sat alone outside the barracks, rain soaking through her uniform. She pulled the old photo of her father from her pocket, edges worn soft from years of handling. His eyes smiled back at her from beneath the brim of his helmet. "Was this enough, Dad?" she whispered. "Or do I have to bleed to be seen?" Her chest tightened. For the first time since she enlisted, she let herself cry. Not from fear, not from weakness, but from the quiet pain of being unseen. She didn't know it then, but the answer was coming, and it would arrive in fire. 2 weeks later, the call came. An enemy assault had hit an outpost on the edge of their sector. Heavy fire, multiple wounded. Reinforcements were needed immediately. Emma's squad was dispatched. The ride out was tense, the air inside the armored vehicle thick with anticipation. Blake sat across from her, checking his weapon. He caught her gaze and gave a firm nod. No words, just trust. Emma checked her pack again. Tourniquets, gauze, morphine, and her rifle. This time she felt something different. Not fear, not doubt, but a quiet resolve. She wasn't going to wait for recognition. She wasn't going to beg for it. She was going to do her job, better than anyone. The outpost was chaos. Smoke rose in thick plumes. The air shook with the rattle of machine guns and the dull thud of mortars. Marines scrambled for cover, shouting over the roar of battle. Emma hit the ground running, scanning for the wounded. She spotted 2 men down near a sandbag wall. Without hesitation, she sprinted forward, bullets kicking dirt around her boots. She slid beside the first Marine, blood pouring from a gash across his torso. Her hands worked fast, pressure bandage, seal, morphine. She shouted orders to the second Marine, guiding his breathing, forcing calm into the storm. A mortar exploded nearby, sending shockwaves through the ground. Emma's ears rang, vision blurring. But she didn't stop, she couldn't stop. Then came the shout. "Corporal down." Emma's head snapped up. Her blood ran cold. Blake. He was sprawled near the gate, smoke curling around him. His rifle lay discarded, his body limp. Without thinking, Emma ran. Her legs burned, lungs screamed, but she pushed forward. She reached him, dropped to her knees. Blood soaked his uniform, dark and fast. "Stay with me," she cried, ripping open her pack. Her hands moved in a blur, tourniquet, gauze, chest seal. She pressed down hard, her own tears mixing with the rain. Blake's eyes fluttered. He coughed, crimson staining his lips. "Hayes," his voice was hoarse, broken. Don't leave me." Emma shook her head fiercely. "I'm not leaving you. You hear me? You're coming home." She pressed harder, ignoring the sting in her own body, ignoring the bullets snapping past. She blocked out the chaos, focusing only on him. And then, something shifted, because she wasn't alone anymore. The Marines who once doubted her, who mocked her, were forming a shield around her. They fired over her head, returning every shot, covering her while she worked. For the first time, the squad wasn't protecting themselves. They were protecting her. Minutes felt like hours. But finally, Blake's breathing steadied. His pulse grew stronger. He was alive. Emma exhaled shakily, her hands trembling. Relief washed over her, but she didn't stop moving. She grabbed his vest, dragged him to safety with every ounce of strength she had left. When she finally collapsed behind cover, Blake alive beside her, the squad closed in, and in their eyes she saw it. Not pity, not dismissal, respect, the kind that couldn't be spoken, the kind that was earned in blood and fire. By dawn, the battle was over. The outpost still stood. The wounded were alive, and the Marines, every single one of them, knew why. Back at base, there was no ceremony, no medals. But something happened that mattered more. When Emma entered the barracks, the squad rose to their feet. Every one of them. Blake, pale but alive, leaned on crutches. He looked at her, voice rough but steady. "Hayes," he said, "we called you just a medic. We were wrong. You're the reason I'm standing here. You're the reason any of us are. And from this day forward, you're one of us." Then, in front of everyone, he raised his hand, not in salute, not in command, but in honor, and one by one the Marines followed, hands raised.
Heads bowed.
A silent tribute to the woman who had carried them all. Emma stood there, throat tight, tears threatening again. She didn't speak. She didn't need to, because in that moment she knew. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't just a medic. She was a Marine, and her father would have been proud.